The Galactic Council Chamber, a vast domed structure at the heart of the Alliance capital, was filled with an electric atmosphere. Representatives from 100 different species occupied their designated sectors, their voices merging into a hum of anticipation. Today was an unprecedented event, the capture and presentation of the apex predator of Zithara Prime, a creature that had eluded every attempt to study it for centuries. Zithara Prime was a planet shrouded in mystery, located on the edge of the known galaxy. Its hostile environment, combined with the dominance of this apex predator, had kept all but the most daring explorers at bay. The creature, a dragon of medium size but immense power, had become the stuff of legend. Descriptions of its size varied, but what remained consistent were the tales of its ferocity, intelligence, and the sheer terror it invoked. The chamber's central platform, usually reserved for high-level discussions and votes, had been repurposed for today's spectacle. In the center, surrounded by a shimmering containment field, was the dragon. Its sleek, muscular form was a blend of power and grace, covered in dark scales that seemed to absorb the light around it. The scales weren't merely black, they were a deep, cosmic void interspersed with flecks of blue, creating the illusion of a starry night sky. When the dragon moved, the scales shifted, giving the impression that stars were dancing across its body. The dragon's wings, folded against its back, hinted at a wingspan that could dominate any battlefield. Even at rest, the creature exuded a palpable aura of dominance. Its eyes, a fierce molten gold, remained half open, watching the proceedings with a predatory intelligence that sent shivers down the spines of those present. The Galactic Council members whispered among themselves, many unable to believe they were actually in the presence of such a formidable creature. Holoscreens floated above the chamber, displaying detailed scans of the dragon, highlighting its dense musculature, powerful heart, and the energy reserves within its body capable of unleashing devastating attacks. At the back of the chamber, a young human girl named Alara stood, barely noticeable among the crowd of important delegates and officials. She was an assistant to one of the minor human representatives, a position that allowed her to observe but rarely participate in the council's affairs. Alara had always been fascinated by creatures, particularly the ones that others deemed dangerous or untamable. As she stared at the dragon, her curiosity overrode the fear that gripped everyone else in the room. The council's lead scientist, a lanky being with a translucent floating head named Dr. Knorr, stepped forward to address the assembly. His voice, though calm, carried an undertone of awe. "Esteemed members of the Galactic Council, what you see before you is the apex of all known predators, a creature that has ruled its domain with unparalleled efficiency. Its capture represents the pinnacle of our technological prowess and strategic planning." The chamber erupted in applause, but Alara noticed something as she watched the dragon. Its eyes, though seemingly calm, were not those of a defeated animal. There was a fire in them, a keen awareness of its surroundings. The dragon wasn't subdued, it was simply waiting. Alara couldn't get the dragon out of her mind. The image of its golden eyes, so full of intelligence and restrained power, haunted her thoughts. She found herself drawn to the council chamber at odd hours, using her access as an assistant to slip past the guards and observe the dragon when no one else was around. One night, after ensuring that the last of the council members had left, Alara made her way to the chamber. The room was dimly lit, the only source of light coming from the containment field that encased the dragon. It hovered in its energy bonds, seemingly asleep, but Alara knew better. As she approached, she could see the subtle rise and fall of the dragon's chest, the faint movement of its nostrils as it breathed. She reached the edge of the containment field and hesitated. Every logical part of her mind screamed at her to stop, to turn around and leave, but the pull was too strong. Alara extended her hand, palm outstretched, towards the dragon. The energy field crackled slightly under her touch, sending a shiver up her arm. To her surprise, the dragon stirred. Its eyes opened slowly, fixing on her with a gaze that was both intense and curious. For a moment, Alara was frozen, caught between fear and wonder. Then, something incredible happened. The dragon, moving with a grace that belied its size, lowered its head until its snout was almost touching the energy field. Alara's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't move. The dragon's eyes softened, and it let out a low, rumbling sound that resonated deep within her. It wasn't a growl, it was a purr. Alara's breath caught in her throat. Without thinking, she pressed her hand against the field, her palm meeting the warmth of the dragon's scales through the barrier. The creature responded by pressing its snout against her hand, the energy field flaring briefly but not repelling her touch. Tears welled in Alara's eyes. The connection she felt in that moment was indescribable. This dragon, feared by the galaxy, was not the mindless beast everyone believed it to be. There was a profound intelligence, a depth of emotion in those golden eyes that she could feel in her very soul. Before she could dwell on it further, the lights in the chamber flickered, signaling the start of a security sweep. Alara pulled her hand back reluctantly. The dragon lifted its head, but its gaze remained on her, as if memorizing her face. "I'll be back," she whispered, even though she knew it couldn't understand her words. But the dragon gave a slow blink, almost as if it did. As Alara slipped out of the chamber, she knew her life had just changed forever. The days following Alara's first encounter with the dragon were a whirlwind of emotion and secrecy. She continued her duties as an assistant, but every free moment she had was spent in the council chamber, slipping in during the quiet hours when the guards were less vigilant. Each night she returned to the dragon, her visits becoming more frequent and more daring. The bond between them grew with each encounter, an inexplicable connection that transcended species and the usual boundaries of fear. The dragon, which had been a symbol of terror, began to reveal its gentler side. It responded to Alara with subtle gestures, a tilt of its massive head, a slow blink of those fierce golden eyes, or the deep, rumbling purr that vibrated through the chamber whenever she spoke to it. Alara was no longer afraid. She was entranced, and with each visit, she felt herself drawn deeper into the mystery of this magnificent creature. However, the dragon's growing awareness and activity did not go unnoticed. The containment field, designed to keep it subdued, was showing signs of strain. The energy bonds that had once held it effortlessly now flickered and crackled, struggling to contain the dragon's latent power. It was as if the creature was awakening from a long slumber, its strength returning with a force that the technology could barely contain. The council grew uneasy. Scientists and security officers monitored the situation closely, their anxiety increasing as the dragon's behavior became more unpredictable. They noticed the creature was no longer content to remain still within its bonds. It shifted and stirred, as if testing the limits of its confinement. Discussions about reinforcing the containment or even sedating the dragon became more frequent and urgent. Alara, oblivious to the escalating tension among the council members, continued her visits, each time feeling the dragon's restlessness more acutely. One evening, as she approached the chamber, she noticed a palpable change in the air. The usual hum of the containment field was louder, more erratic, and the dragon, which had always greeted her with calm curiosity, was now pacing within its bonds, its wings rustling with unease. Alara entered the chamber, her heart pounding with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The dragon's eyes locked onto hers immediately, and she could sense the anxiety radiating from it. Something was wrong. "Hey, it's okay," Alara said softly, moving closer to the energy field. Her voice trembled slightly, but she pushed the fear aside, focusing on the bond she had cultivated with the creature. "I'm here." The dragon's pacing slowed, but the tension in its body was still evident. It lowered its head, bringing its snout close to the field, and let out a low, mournful growl. Alara could feel the vibrations through the air, a sound that was more sad than threatening. Without hesitation, Alara reached out, her hand brushing against the energy field that separated them. The field crackled in response, the energy flaring and then dimming as if struggling to maintain its integrity. The dragon pressed its snout closer to her hand, its scales warm even through the barrier. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the chamber. The doors slammed open, and a flood of light filled the room as armed guards and council members rushed in. They had been monitoring the chamber closely, and the moment the containment field showed signs of failing, they had sprung into action. "Get away from it!" a voice commanded, but Alara barely registered the words. Her focus was entirely on the dragon, which had lifted its head, eyes narrowing as it sensed the approaching threat. The energy field around it began to flicker more violently, unable to cope with the mounting stress. The council members and guards were in a state of panic, unsure whether to attack or retreat. Weapons were drawn, energy rifles primed, and the atmosphere was thick with tension. The dragon, now fully alert, let out a deafening roar that shook the chamber. Its wings flared open, and the containment field finally shattered, sending a shockwave through the room. Alara stood her ground, her heart racing, but she did not move. The dragon's roar had not been one of aggression, it was a warning. The creature was protecting itself, reacting to the fear and hostility around it. Before the guards could fire, Alara raised her hands, stepping directly between them and the dragon. "Stop!" she shouted, her voice breaking through the chaos. "You're scaring it!" For a brief, tense moment, no one moved. The dragon stood tall, its body coiled and ready to strike, but its eyes remained fixed on Alara. The guards hesitated, their fingers hovering over the triggers of their weapons, uncertain how to proceed. Alara turned her attention back to the dragon, her expression softening. She could see the fear in its eyes, the confusion. It was intelligent enough to understand that it was in danger, but also that Alara was not a threat. "It's okay," she whispered, stepping closer to the dragon, her hand reaching out to touch its snout. The dragon's eyes followed her every move, and as her fingers made contact with its warm scales, the tension in its body seemed to dissipate. The creature lowered its head, pressing gently against her hand, and a deep, soothing purr filled the chamber. The guards and council members watched in stunned silence as Alara calmly stroked the dragon's snout, her presence alone enough to quell the beast's anger. The scene was surreal, this enormous, powerful predator tamed by a simple human girl. The dragon, for its part, seemed to have no intention of causing harm. It remained close to Alara, its wings folding back against its body as it settled onto the floor of the chamber. The golden glow of its eyes softened, and the once frightening creature now looked almost peaceful. Alara could feel the dragon's gratitude, its trust in her. She knew, without a doubt, that the bond they shared was something rare and profound. The danger was far from over, but for now, they had found a fragile peace. The council members exchanged glances, their earlier fear giving way to a mix of awe and confusion. How had this young girl managed to do what their most advanced technology could not? How had she calmed the galaxy's most feared predator with nothing more than a touch? Dr. Connor, who had been among the first to arrive, stepped forward cautiously. "Miss Alara," he said, his voice measured. How did you do that?" Alara turned to face the council members, her hand still resting on the dragon's snout. "It's not a monster," she said quietly, but with conviction. "It's intelligent. It's scared, and it's alone. It just needs someone to understand that." The chamber fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. The dragon had been treated as a mindless beast, a threat to be contained and studied. But Alara had seen something different, something no one else had bothered to look for. The dragon's golden eyes flicked between Alara and the council members, as if it too was waiting for their response. Finally, Dr. Connor nodded slowly, a look of realization dawning on his face. "Perhaps," he began, choosing his words carefully, "we have been approaching this situation from the wrong perspective." Alara smiled, a sense of hope welling up inside her. The dragon rumbled softly in response, as if agreeing. It was clear to everyone present that this was no ordinary creature, and Alara was no ordinary girl. As the tension in the chamber eased, the guards lowered their weapons, and the council members began to see the situation in a new light. What had started as a crisis had become an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to forge a new path forward, one based on understanding rather than fear. But Alara knew that this was only the beginning. The bond she had formed with the dragon had opened a door to a world of possibilities, but it would take time, patience, and courage to fully explore what lay beyond. The awakening of the dragon was not just a physical event. It was the start of a transformation, one that would change the course of the galaxy forever. In the days that followed, the Galactic Council found themselves grappling with a situation they had never anticipated. The apex predator of Zithara Prime, once considered the most dangerous creature in the galaxy, had formed an unbreakable bond with a human, a simple assistant with no special training or qualifications. The implications were staggering. Alara was summoned to a series of meetings with the highest-ranking members of the Council. There were questions, concerns, and endless debates. Many were skeptical, unable to comprehend how such a bond could have formed. Others saw it as a unique opportunity to learn from the creature in ways they had never thought possible. Alara, for her part, did her best to explain what she felt when she was with the dragon. She spoke of the creature's intelligence, its emotions, and the profound connection she had with it. She argued that the dragon wasn't just a mindless predator, it was a sentient being with its own thoughts and feelings. The council was divided. Some members feared that the dragon was manipulating Alara, using her to escape or cause harm. Others, however, were intrigued by the possibility of a peaceful coexistence with such a powerful creature. They proposed a series of controlled interactions, with Alara acting as a mediator to better understand the dragon's capabilities and intentions. The first of these interactions was tense. The dragon was brought to an open area under heavy guard, its movements closely monitored. Alara stood at the center of the clearing, waiting nervously as the dragon was released. The creature immediately flew to her, landing with surprising delicacy, and once again lowered its head to her. Alara stroked its snout, feeling the familiar warmth of its scales under her fingers. The dragon rumbled softly, a sound that she had come to recognize as a sign of contentment. The guards remained on high alert, but the council members observing the scene were beginning to understand what Alara had been trying to convey. Over time, the bond between Alara and the dragon became a symbol of hope for the Galactic Council. They began to see that the galaxy's most dangerous creatures might not be enemies, but potential allies, capable of emotions and relationships just like any other species. Alara and the dragon, now named Asra after the stars on its scales, became inseparable. She rode on its back during flights over the capital, a sight that became iconic throughout the galaxy. What had once been a story of fear and danger had transformed into a tale of unexpected friendship and understanding. The galaxy watched as Alara and Asra continued their journey together, breaking down barriers and changing perceptions. The dragon, once a symbol of terror, became a reminder of the importance of empathy, trust, and the bonds that can form between even the most unlikely of friends. And so, the Galactic Council learned that true power lay not in domination or control, but in the connections forged through understanding, respect, and a willingness to see beyond fear.